welcome back to my channel. Finally, you see the title of this video is finally my Q&A. I have been mentioning several times in my previous mini vlogs, so I'm finally getting time to sit down and answer you guys' questions that you've had under my videos, and hopefully give you guys some tips that would help you get through the program. If you're just starting or currently in or about to graduate, then sometimes you may still need a little bit of help even afterwards, because even I know once I graduate, I'm gonna still have to refer back to some of my stuff just to make sure I keep my mind sharp, so that when it comes down to the critical thinking, I can just think quick on my feet. So I'm going to answer, I think I got quite a bit of questions, and I've answered some of them under the comment section, but I wanted to go ahead and re-answer them in this video, because some people that it may be their first time getting to my channel and this may be the first video they run across, so maybe the questions that I've already answered may be questions that they have, so that's why I'm going to go ahead and re-answer them in the video. So I do remember a couple of questions, and as you guys see, I have my laptop here to refer back to any questions that I may not have answered, so that way I can make this Q&A as short as possible. The first question that I did get that was recent is, I hate Egan's, but your videos are great. Do you have any study tips? So the last video that I did upload, I did have, it was like maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and I did have a scene in there where I showed you guys where I was making notes on my PowerPoint that I had. The best study tip that I have when using Egan's is that I do hate Egan's myself. I'm not a fan of it because it's so much material you have to try to grasp, and sometimes it just gets overwhelming because of the lengthiness of the chapters. But what I like to do, and this may help you guys, I'm not sure, whatever PowerPoints or study guide or any type of materials that your instructor gives you to study for an upcoming exam, what I like to do is that very same day when I get home from school, you may be tired because with it being summer semester or just overall overwhelming material within that classroom and it's hard to retain, I like to kind of reset when I go home for the day, and I'll go through the chapters and kind of read over the sections that's mentioned in the PowerPoint or whatever study material your teacher gives you. And sometimes it doesn't hurt to go through those sections in the Egan's book and try to highlight some important factors that you think would go with that slide that you're running across, because then that way when you have all the additional information already written in the PowerPoint, you can kind of only refer to that PowerPoint without having to go back and forth through the Egan's book. Because one thing that I've learned that could put you behind is if you're trying to be the type that kind of reads through the entire chapter and then you kind of reread the chapters over and over again, you're going to get overwhelmed after a while, and then all the information that you just read a million times is not going to even stick, and by the time you sit in front of your exam, you're not going to have any clue as to how to eliminate the answers that you know are wrong, and then you're just stuck on that question. And then you might remember maybe a couple of things from the Egan's book, but it's not going to be as helpful if you don't notate those notes next to each slide that you have on your PowerPoint, and then that way all you have to refer to is your actual PowerPoint and not having to go back to Egan's. So don't get me wrong, if it's something that I may have missed, or I might go on and say, well, I don't quite understand this sentence that they wrote here on this bullet, I will still go back in Egan's and refer to that section to kind of have a better way to understand it. Because one thing I will say, when we first started doing mechanical ventilation with all the modes, trying to understand what they do, how to go about setting a patient up on it, Egan's did help me with mechanical vent. So I will say that Egan's is not all bad. It's just taking the time to actually go through it and learning how to target that chapter without being overwhelming, because I don't read every section in the chapter. I'll only refer to sections that's only mentioned in the PowerPoint. That way you may cut that chapter in half, and in some shape or form you might even be able to blow through the whole chapter fairly quickly, to where you can just only concentrate on your PowerPoint and just using Egan's as a reference to go back on something that you may feel like you didn't write enough information down because it's still not clicking. But that's what I like to do. And another thing that I like to do to help me study, and I will copy those links below so you guys can either subscribe to those pages or just use them as a reference guide like I do. I've subscribed to some channels. One of them is Respiratory Therapy Zone, Respiratory Coach, the Amoeba Sisters, and there's one more, ICU Advantage. All four, I think I mentioned four, either 4 or 5 of those pages I subscribe to. Is some things with respiratory that are better explained with multi-pages, because if you have one page that you may have drawn that's captured your attention, maybe the subject that you're currently teaching, learning at that moment, whether it's pulmonary disease or the modes of mechanical ventilation, some pages may not explain it. Once they get to that section, they may not explain it to the point where it might just retain in your mind and you can kind of say, okay, well, he said this and this and that. Sometimes you need other resources to teach certain sections, because certain sections also explain it a whole lot better. Like, for example, ABGs. I didn't quite understand ABGs in class, even with my teacher explaining it. And at that time, the teacher that I had, it was one of those instances where you have to go back home and kind of re-educate yourself to the point where you have to use outside resources if the material that was given to you doesn't really explain and break down each and every explanation of how do you interpret this lab value to determine whether you put this person on invasive or non-invasive ventilation. So that's something that's also good as well. There's also another page on here, and it's not actually a respiratory therapy, it's a nursing page that explains the respiratory diseases very well, and it definitely helped me understand the diseases when I was taking that class last semester. And it definitely helped me add additional notes to my PowerPoint. So just in case if it's something that was mentioned in class that I didn't quite understand, those pages that I do watch on YouTube do help me when it comes to going back and studying for it. So once I take my exam, I can kind of read the question and kind of see that visual, and then I can select the answer with no problem. And that way you don't have to feel like you're stuck on it to where you can't even decide whether this is right. You don't want to be unsure. You want to always be sure. So sometimes it helps to use outside resources that your teacher may not give you. And even if your teacher is good, bad, or satisfactory, it's always good to have additional resources, but not to the point where you're like purchasing different books and going by what they're saying versus what your teacher is saying, because you got to remember your instructor is a respiratory therapist. They've already taken their boards. They've already got certified in different types of specialties. So they know exactly what to give you and what to teach you when it comes to trying to understand the material, so that when you sit for your boards, you are very much prepared. You know the information, and any additional questions that you may have, you can just ask that in class and they can answer it to their best ability. But always keep in mind that your teacher knows what they're talking about. But if it's to an instance where you really don't understand and you have to go home and start from scratch again, you can also go on YouTube and Google some pages, and a lot of people explain it very well. So that way you can kind of have an idea to what to do and how to explain. And sometimes these channels do help you ask the right questions in class, because there's no such thing as a dumb question. But sometimes you want to make sure when you ask a question, you ask it to the point where you get all the points that you were confused on answered, and you can understand it and retain to the point where it's stuck in there. It hasn't just went in one ear and gone out the other. And that's what I used to help me get through my first 2 semesters of respiratory school. And another thing as well, using colored pens, markers, whatever helps you. I like to use colored pens, and for several reasons, because I think that black and white on paper and studying it is very bland, boring, and it makes me tired to the point where I do get sleepy. I like to use colored pens, highlighters, and markers and everything like that to keep my studying interesting, to keep me awake, to keep me more alert when I'm reading it, and also to make sure that when I'm reading something like that and it's color coded, I retain it a whole lot easier, and it makes me more interested to go back and redo everything that I took note. Color coordinating your notes does help a lot for people who are not really good at studying just the material that's given. Color culture stuff, draw pictures, whatever helps you. I don't really care how a person would feel looking at your notes, saying that maybe your notes are a little childish sometimes, but I like childish. Just like, for example, one of the pages that I gave an example of, the Amoeba Sisters, those are cartoons of amoebas. Their channel helped me understand the flow of the heart, and also any additional notes that I needed to write down, I was able to retain that just by watching their videos. I learn better with cartoons. I learn better with people that explain more in depth and that have an actual whiteboard in the background going over everything. And there's a lot of pages that also have animations that break down everything, so that way when you look at a test question, you can say, oh, that animation showed these signs and symptoms, this is what I should choose, and this is the right answer. So sometimes it does help to have animations or find what captures your attention, so that way you can rewatch that video over and over and over again. And for me, with pulmonary disease, animations helped me a lot. And there's a couple of other pages that I do follow as well. I can't remember their names, but they're on my subscription thing. So I will link all of them at the bottom so you guys can kind of go to the page and walk through everything. And with the pulmonary disease, I do recommend the page that I can't remember the name of, which I will have linked below, like I said. So I will put a comment next to that telling you guys that this particular page helped me with pulmonary disease, because I was able to walk away from my class with an A. And I know a lot of people struggle with pulmonary disease because it's a lot of information, and you have to kind of be able to learn the signs and symptoms, the way you would look at a person's blood gas, what it would look like, and just everything that you would see that a person is experiencing and what to look for. And that channel that I will have the comment next to did help me understand that well, because it's like it captured everything I needed to know within a 5 to 7 minute video. And those short videos, me watching them over and over, helps me retain it so much better, to the point where I can write notes, additional notes on my PowerPoint, and most of the time you will see those questions on your exams. So that is why I always say use outside resources to make notes on your PowerPoint or whatever type of study material your teacher gives you. If it's not present on that material, it doesn't hurt to write it down, because I'd rather know more than less. And a lot of times, don't do it to the point where you're learning more and it's overwhelming, to the point where you're not able to finish getting through the whole entire chapter of material that has been given to you in the class. So I know that answer was pretty lengthy, but I wanted to share what I use to get through my classes to where I can get an A. And I'm the type of person that never started off in college making straight A's, never in life. But as you get to the point where you're starting to do something that you actually would like to do and you love and you really want it, you're going to put the hard work in, and it's going to show. So I feel like the hard work that I put in, it has shown. Don't get me wrong, I've never made like A's on every single exam that I've taken, but my overall grade did end up panning out to be an A. And these study tips that I'm giving you, along with answering these questions, they did help me get through to the point where I could come out with a final grade of an A. The next question that I had is my program online? Yes and no. Yes, because some classes that are maybe less than 3 credits are 50% online. For example, my pharmacology class. My pharmacology class was 3 credits, but 50% of that class was online because of altogether we had 4 classes, and each class was very, very intensive as far as pulmonary disease, pharmacology, advanced critical care, and critical care. Because with the critical care class, we were introduced to mechanical ventilation, the modes and everything like that, and some extra stuff to kind of prepare us for summer semester when we strictly went into mechanical vent course and material. So with that being said, the advanced critical care class was only 1 credit, and that was a class that ended halfway through the second semester. So we had a exam in all 3 classes almost every week. Well, I will say every week. And 50% of those exams in the pharmacology class were online. And the advanced critical care, to say it was a 1 credit class, everything that we took as far as the exams, pop quizzes, study material, and our final exam was all in person. So with the pharmacology class, that was online. So sometimes certain classes that our instructor would think like it's a little bit more easier, or to the point where we've covered majority of that material in class previously, or with the material that we're learning in our other courses, she would put 50% of that class online, and then once the 50% mark has been met, we'll start back in class, and then that way we could just pick up where the advanced critical class ended on, and then we would pick up from there and finish that out to the end of the semester. All our other classes are in person. We do clinicals in person. We do any type of sleep lab study in person. Everything that we've been doing thus far with clinicals, certain lecture classes in lab, we have done in person. And any classes that our instructor felt like we could put online, they are subject to put it online at any point, because with COVID and everything, that has changed. But some areas, the COVID numbers are up and down, so they kind of want to have us have that 50% opportunity to have the classes online, to kind of give our instructor a little bit of space and a window to kind of be able to stay on time without having to totally change our class schedule for the semester. And I think that same person had an additional question, which was about my interning. They was asking how soon was I able to intern, and what all do I do. I did upload a vlog that did where I brought you guys a day in the life with me at work, and I will also link that video below as well, so you guys can kind of look at that and see if that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what I do. But with my facility, there are some facilities that do require an RT student to be at least a senior before they can even be hired to work in the hospital. But with my job specifically that I've been at for about almost 4 years, they have the coverage where they are accepting students as early as first semester. But with you being a first semester student, you have to have already been exposed to clinical rotations, given breathing treatments, educating patients on MDIs, DPIs, ISs, and also being able to instruct a patient when it comes to how deep to take a breath in on the ISs, how long to hold their breath when they're using a DPI or a MDI, and also taking those deep breaths in between the nebulized treatment. So certain things you have to be prepared for when you are hired as an intern. Me personally, I had been exposed to clinical rotations as early as first semester, which I was surprised, because I thought, you know, clinicals didn't start until like maybe the end of your second towards the third. So with us, we started out right out the gate first semester around, I think it was October or November. And with my program, it's accelerated, so that plays a big part in why we did our clinical rotations as early as first semester. When we started our clinical rotations, I was of course nervous. I had never given a breathing treatment before, and honestly, a lot of people get prescribed take-home machines that they give treatments to their children, and it's a difference between, it's the very same thing, but there's difference between the treatments that are administered at home and treatments that are administered in the hospital. I get so tongue-tied on that, but there's a lot of education that comes with knowing what leader flows that belong to certain devices that you can only give certain treatments on, what mucus clearance devices can be attached to those nebulized treatments. what type of inline device you would use for a person that's on a trach, that has a endotracheal tube. There's so many things that come with that you have to know when giving nebulized treatments. So that is why it's like when you do start working as either an extern or an intern, you have to be very knowledgeable about those ranges. It's going to help you be able to go in and just hook your patient up to that and then start your treatment. You already know how long it's going to last. You know what to assess when you go in, and you know what to check, and you know what to do. Because me as a first semester intern, I didn't start until the beginning of my second semester, but I had already completed like all the necessary rotations and everything like that when I first started in this past January. Of course, I was nervous because this turned into clinicals with preceptors to like some real life stuff, and I would have to make clinical judgments with my patients. I would have to be able to be very quick on my feet with answering any questions that my patients may have about the treatment, the drug name, what it does, and what it's going to make them do. You know, you have to be very, very alert and ready and prepared for anything that comes your way. For example, I had a patient, disclaimer, make sure when you do any videos, if you are planning on starting a channel or anything like that that's going to be publicized on a public network like YouTube or anything, make sure you don't disclose too much information that would fall under the HIPAA guidelines and get you in a lot of trouble, because HIPAA don't play, OSHA, all of that. So limited information. My patient had was in very, very severe respiratory distress to the point where she required a high flow nasal cannula on a vapotherm and a non-rebreather maxed out. And you guys know that with non-rebreathers you have to administer at 100%, which is also known as 15 liters. But if you guys that have already started clinicals, if you notice and you are familiar with the flow meters, those flow meters can go a little bit past 15 liters. So it doesn't really matter if you do have the non-rebreather hooked up to that flow meter. Flush it all the way past the 15%, because that is still considered 100% of flow being given to that non-rebreather, and you know that patient is getting everything correctly, and you won't have any issues with a patient rebreathing their CO2 and having that CO2 climbing once you take an ABG and result it out. So anybody that's already have like a drive that's like minimal or already to the point where it can be knocked out, don't knock out a person's drive by doing that, because then you have a whole different situation you have to take care of. So just be mindful that when you do work as an intern, you have to know those things, because you could cause a problem, because oxygen is still a drug. So you have to be very mindful on how you administer it and knowing those values, so that way you don't give your patient too much than what's required for those certain devices. But back to the story, I had my patient that required a vapotherm and a non-rebreather at the same time. She could barely speak without desatting to low 80s, and sometimes she would drop to low 70s. She couldn't even move. It's like any type of movement she desatted. If I asked her a question, she desatted. So that's another thing that falls into your assessment skills. If you walk in, our instructor told us you're observing your patient and assessing your patient from the time you walk in the door until you end up to the side of the bed. I could already tell walking in that my patient was already, hyperventilating. She basically could not make any type of movement. I noticed her O2 desatted very, very low. Anytime she took the non-rebreather off, she would desat as well. So it's like the only way she could stay in the mid 90s, I want to say at 93, 94, she had to have both devices on. And with the vapotherm, if you guys haven't already seen it, and I will insert a picture right here so you can see what it looks like, with this type of device, it can only go up to 40 liters. So she was already at 35 liters, and on the FiO2 she was probably at 90. So she was almost to that borderline to where she was maxing out on both FiO2 and both liter flow. And with the non-rebreather, she was already maxed out on that. So it was like this lady is sat and like dropping real low. And even with the non-rebreather, when she needed to eat, I had to turn her Vapotherm up to 40 liters and max it to at least 100, so that way she can eat and it can kind of compensate for what the non-rebreather was giving her when she had that on top of the Vapotherm. So I basically had to stay in the room and monitor her, and of course the nurses is going to monitor her too. But if I had to go administer a treatment or anything like that, I would also communicate with the nurse and let them know, like, hey, I have a couple of treatments I have to do on the other side of the floor, so if she desats to this range, please call me, let me know, so I can come in and put her back on what she was previously on when I walked in the room. So they, you know, and one thing I would say as a tip, be very, very respectful and very, very confident in what you do when you're communicating with both the nurses, the doctors, and any other respiratory therapist that you are calling for help. So if you have to ask any questions to your backup therapist, be very clear, be very attentive, to the point where you know once you have this situation approaching, you know what to prepare for. So that way, if your patient declines or whatever the case may have, you can pretty much act fast and let your backup therapist know, like, hey, I'm putting this patient on this. And sometimes if you feel confident enough that what you're about to do is going to work, do what you have to do, because you have to chart that anyway. So that way you know that at that point, once you've done what you're supposed to do, you've charted, you don't have to worry about any type of penalty when it comes to being in trouble for something you didn't include in that charting, and anything where the patient may have declined like significantly during transport. So that's something to keep in mind as well when you're working as an intern. Now there is a difference between an intern and an extern. Intern, you're actually on the floor, you're actually taking patients, you're actually administering treatments, transporting, dealing with BiPAPs, CPAPs, AutoPAPs, high flow devices, and even making a judgment to the point where if your patient has been kind of low throughout the day, always be very, very alert to that. Because if you make first rounds in the morning and you notice that your patient is already on room air and they're sat in a certain, you know, range, make sure you've already reviewed that patient's chart, because a lot of times your sheets that you have with the patient information will not have everything you need on there. They might have their admitting diagnosis, but you also want to make sure you look at their history, because if you have a patient that's satting, let's say 89, 88, if you know you've already looked at the patient's history and you've seen that they have a history of COPD and they were admitted for either exacerbation of COPD or a pneumonia on top of that, or a flu on top of that, anything that they develop acutely on top of what they've already had as a lifetime disease, that will give you an idea to say, hey, okay, they have a history of COPD, so their normal range of oxygenation is between 88 and 92. So if they fluctuate between that range of 88 and 92, your patient's good. They don't need to have any oxygen. But if you notice when you walk in, again, assess your patient from the door until you get to the bedside. If you notice they're having increased work of breathing, it's okay to administer at least 1 liter to 1 to 2 liter of oxygen to decrease that work, to relax them to the point where they start to feel a little bit better and their anxiety level is gone from high to low. So sometimes you also don't need oxygen just to fix your SpO2. You need oxygen to administer to a patient to kind of decrease their work of breathing, because they may have okay sats, but they have increased cardiac work. So it's like you don't want their heart rate to stay increased. You want to decrease their cardinal work. So also keep in mind that sometimes oxygen is not used for just fixing SpO2. It can help fix decreasing that respiratory drive and cardio drive. And sometimes if a person has a history of heart disease or anything like that, PEs, or just anything that has something to do with why they have increased cardinal work, sometimes oxygen can't fix that. So unless you have a situation where a patient has like some real serious heart problems that are outside of respiratory, it's nothing that we can do. All we can do is make the patient comfortable and follow the orders and protocols that that facility has in place for those specific patients and those specific diagnoses at that time. So that's a good thing to consider when you're an intern as well. Okay, this Q&A is a lot longer than I had hoped. So right now I'm at 30 minutes and some change. So I'm going to make this Q&A into 2 parts. So I'm going to continue editing this first part, and then I'm going to upload that, and then I should have part 2 up by the end of, if not this week, next week, because like I was saying before, it does take a while to edit these videos when they're pretty lengthy. So hopefully the questions that I was able to answer in this part 1 were helpful, and I will start editing part 2 possibly this week and then upload it by next week. So that's all I wanted to say, because this video was getting past 30 minutes and I was like, that is too long, and I know it will take a gazillion years for it to upload on YouTube with it being so long. So that is why I'm throwing this little message in here right now. So I'm going to end this vlog right here, and I will see you guys in the next one. So I hope you guys continue to watch the new mini vlogs that I do have uploaded thus far. So hopefully you guys go ahead and check that out, and then just ask any more questions if you want me to answer any more questions in the future. But as far as right now, this is what I got.